Oh, I just thought of something.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is there a light bulb over your head? Or that's
Wait. Oh, it is, but it's dim and flickering. What does that say?
Well, I like sort of melancholy, moody stuff, so I don't know. Maybe you've got that kind of an idea.
Sure, it's from a cyberpunk future. Yeah, okay.
Nice.
That's what that means. So, having ideas, having moments of inspiration, we talk about it. It's in the log line of our show, creativity, inspiration, and dealing with what we're dealt. And I thought today it would be fun. I was inspired by the idea of talking about inspiration.
There's an irony there.
Isn't there? So that's good because I have a lot of wrinkled clothes. I didn't say that out loud.
I knew that was. You didn't see.
You felt it?
I knew.
Your
yes.
father humor?
Yes.
So bad.
Dad jokes.
Well, but see, now we can say anything because everybody has stopped listening at this point.
Crickets.
All right. Well, so what do you say? You want to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Welcome to the Heart of the Cards, a conversation about creativity, inspiration, and dealing with what we're dealt.
Hey, this is Dan Green.
And Eric Stuart.
And this is episode 31 of The Heart of the Cards.
30 wonderful flavors.
Yes, and potentially many more coming our way. So inspiration is a, pretty widely used term. It can be applied to a lot of different things. But we often talk about it in terms of making our stuff.
Yes.
Right? Expressing our creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it would be fun today to talk about sometimes how they come from the most unexpected places.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like this amazing moment where all the stars have aligned and you're fortunate enough to behold this beauty of the universe.
Yes.
Yes. So let's just jump in. Would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first?
Since you had the light bulb over your head in the beginning of the episode, why don't you?
Yeah, I'll try to screw that in a little tighter. So I'm going to give the unexpected one where it comes from an unexalted place.
Okay.
Or a less exalted place. Because I think we all have that trope in our head that, it's like the clouds parting and a ray of sunshine comes down. And okay, so instead, it can come from a set of limitations. And limitations, I think we've talked about this before, are really helpful to creative processes. It's perhaps a little counterintuitive. But in this story, I had the limitation of trying to incorporate a phrase. This was a writing contest presented by this guy. I like a lot of his content. He's called Robert Meyer Burnett. He has the show Robservations. He also appears on other shows talking about geek pop culture is largely his strength. He actually filmed all. Did you watch the behind-the-scenes stuff on the Lord of the Rings DVDs?
Some of it, yes.
Yeah, well, he's the guy who made all that content.
Oh.
Right? So, yeah, he's worked in Hollywood and for his whole life, and so he has a good context to talk about these kinds of things. Anyway, but he also loves science fiction, and he suggested doing this writing contest, and this was during the height of the shutdown during COVID. And so I was like, okay, this sounds like a fun idea, just a short story. So one of the restrictions for this is, could you find a way to work into the story the phrase imagination connoisseur, which is a phrase that they use on his podcasts. His audience comes in and they come up with a lot of, cool little ways to reference, stuff. So an imagination connoisseur sort of just describes this community that likes this genre material. And I'm like, imagination connoisseur is an interesting idea. Mm-hmm. So that became the principle around which I created the short story A Cure for Grief. Now, this again was taking place during the shutdown. Grief, the idea of grief was in the air.
Yes.
Was in our culture, in our world. And so I came up with a short story that we're turning into an audio drama that'll be about an hour or so long with a full cast. And but I wouldn't have come up with the premise of the idea if it hadn't been for that limitation of imagination connoisseur, and without spoiling the reading of the story or the performance of the story, the premise is that, and remember, this is a sci-fi geared audience, sort of thing. So the premise is that, did you see the movie, it's one of Christopher Nolan's finest, Inception?
Yes.
So they can go into somebody's mind. It's a mind heist kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it trades a little bit on that concept, or that kind of a thing. And because I'm writing it at this time, of course, there's a concern about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And the guy who the team is counting on to save the day is the best at doing this mind plumbing sort of thing, and they need him to determine whether a scientist has actually built something AI-wise that is threatening to the future of our species, or if he's merely been thinking about it, imagining it, right?
Okay.
Because this guy is really good at understanding how the mind works, and he also is really in touch with his own imagination. So because he is an imagination connoisseur, he can determine the threat of the situation. So,
I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed this process of writing, and it really helped me to become a much better writer. And I couldn't have done it without the help of a lot of other people who read previous drafts. And I called everybody I knew into it because I wanted to do a good job on this contest, which is another thing. That's another kind of restriction.
Yep.
A challenge, a deadline. You're putting yourself out there, and you want to at least not embarrass yourself, right? So I was deeply rewarded by that process. We actually, and I think, are going to have a good time with this as presenting it as an audio drama.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that part, definitely.
Yeah, and even though it's genre oriented, it's anybody can understand the story, the value of what the story is talking about.
I think you write that way, just consistently. Anyway, I was just going to mention that it's interesting that you are one of the few very creative people that I know that is open to feedback. Of course, I think you pick and choose wisely. I think I'm.
You don't want it from everybody.
I am flattered that I am sometimes included in those discussions.
Yes, you are.
But it is rare. When you were talking about writing from a phrase or even a title, that's very songwriter of you. Some of the co-writes down here, someone will just have a song title when they get together to write something together, and then you're working around that. So there's your limitations. Like, you might have come in with a great idea about something completely different, but today we're going to be writing with this title in mind. So it's interesting that you wrote a short story with that as sort of your, like, well, here's your parameters, this, and also, the contest side of that. Having the pressure.
Well, and that's a short story also, right?
Yeah,
so that's a word limit. Yeah. I got right up to the edge.
Now, did you like let it flow and then looked at how many words you used and decided, now I've got to edit? Or did you, as you were writing, try to keep it brief while you were creating?
Yeah. So the idea was big enough that it was more about making use of the whatever 11,000 words or whatever it is that is the limit for a short story. So yeah, it was about being choosy about what parts of the story matter
as you wrote it.
And you're finding it when you're writing it. A lot of what exists in the first draft informs later drafts. You see that it's the same thing, right? But there's less time talking about these concerns, more time given to a dramatic element that's been put in to better characterize a relationship or something like that, right? And in particular with this, it deals with some sci-fi concepts, but also some basic human emotion. And so part of the feedback that was really useful for me was understanding how much of it was coming across and in what ways, and balancing that. But yeah, I wasn't struggling to come up with the words.
Right. Yeah. I'm wondering, like, okay, so if I can only make it a 2-page story, as I'm writing, it's like, okay, I'd love to explain it this much, but I'm gonna edit as I go. Or did you edit as afterwards? And with the feedback on something like that, especially since you tend to write from what you know, even though I can't say that I've known you to do any space travel yet, or maybe you have. But the core emotions, the story, these are things. Even if it's told in it, with different characters, I feel like there's an honesty because there are emotions that you can relate to, and hopefully the reader or listener can also relate to them.
I think that's all about character. This is not a revolutionary observation, and regardless of the genre, you need a character that you can at least understand.
But to be able to create that, and write that way, so that it doesn't seem like you're just, it's just BS, and you're just, you're
cycling through some tropes.
You're like, oh yeah. Here's the guy that's suffering from this,
Right. You should feel sorry for him.
So when you get the critique though on like the dialogue, the actual dialogue of these characters, because I mean, there's so many different ways to say the same thing, and a lot of them are valid. Right. How do you take those comments and not turn, as we've said before, like we say in the advertising world, where too many people have the opinion, a camel is a horse designed by a committee. One of my favorite. How do you not end up with the camel when getting that feedback?
Right. I mean, a part of it is that you know what you want, and you want to make sure that you're still listening to that. And another part of it is you're going to respond to the feedback itself. And if you know who you're getting the feedback from, I think that provides a context where you can say this feedback is absolutely, brilliant and good and helpful, to the other end of the spectrum where it's, I think this is only an issue for this person and it doesn't really bother me, and and especially because I asked other people, I had a range. If something was consistently coming up as an issue, I was like, got to pay attention to that.
Sure.
Right?
No, that's very smart.
Yeah.
Do you also pick and choose your experts in the different
for sure.
categories, right?
Yeah. So they're not all the same personality type,
right?
If that's what you mean.
Well, also like,
but they all meet a certain standard of, I believe they know what good storytelling is.
Right. It's like, so you send one thing to someone because you're looking at the grammar, and you send another thing to someone.
Yes.
Exactly. Things like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, that's smart. That's smart.
Yeah. It was very rewarding, and I encourage anybody to, if you feel like you're stuck creatively, just give yourself a little challenge like that. If you're drawing, well, just try to draw 5 different versions of a mouth, or whatever.
Right.
And that very often gets the juices flowing.
And how long did it take you to write that?
18 years. Just kidding.
I'm still working on it.
It must have been over the course of a few months.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. Very cool.
Well worth it.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. So now the spotlight is on you. You don't have to follow the same pattern.
No. But, that was very interesting. My latest endeavor into being inspired by something is, I guess, also the limitations. I was having such a hard time completing a song that I was working on, like a really hard time.
Yes, you've talked to me about this.
And
go ahead.
And I think one of the reasons is because a lot of what I've written in the past has always been about either the struggles of relationships or the drama or the dark side of stuff. And as you become a little bit more happy in your life, maybe that is harder to find. My wife, Lindsay, who's a painter, said her best paintings are when she was really depressed, and she's having a hard time finding the way to paint happy, right? It's the same thing with songwriting. But when I was working on this, rarely do I have a title in mind. and rarely do I have even a concept of what I'm going to do. I start to play music and then I start to form ideas. But with this one, and I think it's because there are a few people that I know right now who are trying to find their creative path. And not that they've never done anything creative, but now they have the freedom to do more things that are creative. And from the sideline, of course, being the eavesdropper, as I've called many songwriters, right? That's what we are. We pay attention to what's going on around us, and we turn it into a song. I was sort of taking note that there seemed to be this, do I do what everyone wants me to do or what I think they want me to do, or do I do what I need to do and what I want to do? And so I had this idea based on starving the ego and feeding the soul, and paying attention to what's really important to who you are with your creativity. So the song is called Soul Starvation. And I was like, all right, I'm going to write around this idea of starving that ego and feeding your soul. First I was like, well, from what perspective? Am I judging someone else? Because that's really where that came from. So everything was you. And then I wrote pretty much little lines here. And if anybody saw some of my songwriting process stuff, I'm a little OCD when it comes to the same thing like making a packing list. I'm the guy that sits down and writes a Word document to print out so that I can cross things off. And that's what I do when I'm packing for a trip. I just do that. It's the only way my brain can really function. And it's the same way when I'm writing songs that ideas come to me. I have a Word document with just a bunch of phrases and different versions of what that verse could be. And here's an idea for like, here's some words that I like the way that they rhyme against each other and whatever. It's a whole, maybe it's a 5 or 10 page running document of absolute, crazy stuff. If you read it, you'd be like, what is he?
So you sort of chat GPT yourself.
Yeah, I pretty much do. Yeah, I pretty much do. So I'm the original AI, right? I'm the OG AI.
Right.
So I have this sort of list of things, and it was taking me a long time to come up with this. And of course, the irony of trying to write a song about being frustrated of how you can be creative. It's like, okay, so I basically was writing almost about writer's block, or not writing about writer's block. And it was really frustrating. I was really there were days that I wouldn't want to even listen to the music to even try to start working on it. And then there were days where I started and I'd get a line or two and I'd go, this is working great. And the minute it started to become a chore, I would just put it aside and say, all right, maybe this isn't supposed to be completed. I don't know. And then the cork pops and I write this whole song in a morning. I sit down, have my cup of coffee and just churn out the whole song. And I'm like, wow. This is great. And I wrote it in you. I was judging, right? I was judging this other person. And I thought, you know what? If this is the process it took to get to this place, it really is about me. Even though I'm not being autobiographical in the song, it's really more of, it should be in the I. So I finally completed it. And I sent it to, and of course, there are very few people that I share my process with because I'm not really interested in too much feedback. If other musicians are working on the track, they might say, oh, this is cool. It'd be neat if we did this. And I'd be like, well, that's great. I didn't really ask you, but that's cool too. And sometimes I'm like, hey, for instance, like John Fox, who sings all the background vocals for me, bass player in my band. I'm like, John, here's what I'm hearing, but please feel free to be creative with the background parts that you want to add. And he did on a bunch of things. And it's like, I like that surprise because that's not my strength.
Sure.
I'm not a harmony vocalist. But when it comes to the message of the lyric, and the grammar. I'm really, really strict about that. Language to me is so cool, right? And the difference between a the or an of can change the meaning of a line so that the double meaning isn't there or it is there. And so my dear friend Martin Schneider, who was my first musical partner, who is still one of my best friends in the whole world, is a genius when it comes to writing. As a hobby when we were growing up, he would write New York Times crossword puzzles and get them published. That was one of his hobbies. So and he actually runs an advertising agency right now. So he's all about writing and the power of words, especially less is more. Like if I only have a catchphrase, will you be able to get exactly what I mean from it? So I sent him the lyrics to this without any explanation whatsoever, because that's what I do. I say, read this. Here's the rough track so you can listen to it in context. Here's the lyric. Read it and tell me if there's something in there that either bothers you or there's some grammar or whatever. And it's kind of a minor key song, so it's got kind of a darkness to it. And he wrote back, and his first comment was, "Wow, this is an Eric I haven't heard in a while," meaning that it was dark, right? He's like, "Wow, this sounds like, and he referenced some of the older stuff that I had written and stuff that he and I had worked on together. And he's like, "This seems like that would be like," and he referenced a much older song that was about, trying to get away from a relationship or finding your way through this. And I responded and I said, well, that's cool that you think this is about like a romantic relationship, but it's actually about, and I explained the whole thing about the creativity. And he goes, and he wrote back and he said, okay, totally cooler idea. He goes, wait a second. He goes, and then he really dove into it. And I felt after all of that work that because I got that feedback from him, that it was okay. It's not just me being so esoteric and all over the place. If you know what it's about, it really is it's very strong lyric and it's a cool melody. But then again, you don't always have to know what that song is about to enjoy it, right? You might just love the groove. Right, you might you love the melody, whatever. But I do want that listener to, when they do decide, I'm going to dive deeper into this song to see what I can pull out of it, like any writing, to see what those other meanings are. So it was well worth the journey, but there was definitely a time or three when I wanted to throw that song out the window and say, I just don't know I just don't know what to do with this. I really don't know what to do with this. But I am quite proud of it. It's pretty cool. And now that my studio is working again, I can actually work on it.
Oh my God, that's a podcast for another time.
That's right. So that was my weird sort of inspiration with a lot of limitations, which were mostly from my own creativity.
It's interesting that in this story you have the inner critic, right? We've been talking about getting advice from other people, but there's a part of you that with the development of this particular song, there are stages of your dissatisfaction and your frustration, right? Which in a sense is another limitation, and I can also understand the difficulty of trying to put a groove to not being in the groove.
Yeah. I mean, when you're just staring blankly at my Word document, it's just like not even having an idea of what to do, where to start. Yeah. So yeah. And and it's for anyone who's in the same boat, when there's times when you just need to get up and take a walk around the block or I always I've joked around about this before. I want to get one of those scuba diving chalkboards that you can write underwater, and I want to put it in my shower, because while I'm in the shower, I come up with some of the best lyrics ever. I want to just be able to jot them down and write them on the wall.
That's a lovely image you've created.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Well, perhaps there's no better way to end this conversation for today. But I did actually, though, I wanted to ask you, though, another thing about the layer of, of getting the feedback and applying it. And you described very clearly, like the not wanting too much of it, which I completely understand. And you only have like a handful of people, 2 or 3?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably every time I work on a song, there's probably 3 musicians, possibly 4 that join me on each song I'm doing.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. But there's very rarely a creative sounding wall, like, hey, is this song good? I really, and I don't want to.
It's more developed. It's more developed when you bring it to them.
Yeah, I don't want to say that it's ego. But I've said this before about my creativity. I have to be the one that likes it. Like I have to.
Sure.
Like I do not want to try to just please the masses. I'd like people to like what I do, but I want to be able to listen to the stuff myself.
Sure, yeah.
Which, I mean, it sounds weird, I guess,
Yeah.
when it's like, oh, you're listening to your own music. It's like, well, I worked so hard on it. What am I supposed to, after I'm done with it and it's out there, I never listen to it?
Yeah, that's a little strange.
And then because the paint is dry, I can just enjoy it. I can't fix it anymore. I can just enjoy it. So in terms of trying to get that feedback of like, hey, is this a good key for me to sing it in? Or do you like the tempo? It's like, or whatever. Or it's like, is this a good song? I rather, like, I've sent you stuff where I've sent it to you because I know you're a music fan. And I'll be like, hey, man, this is something I was working on. And what's cool is your feedback is not, well, Eric's asking me to break this down and analyze this. Eric's feedback is, what he's looking for is, I got the song, man. I love it. It's cool, right? Like, I think you said one thing to me when I sent you the song that I wrote, Killer Kiss, which is my little techie sort of homage to like Depeche Mode kind of stuff. And
very good.
You told me you played it for Ken, our chief music composer for Crossing the Gods and everything else we do. And you said, Ken wanted to let you know that he really he loved the song and he thought the structure was great and the melody and it was like, oh, that's great. I appreciate that. But like, I never look for that. I never look for that feedback.
Right.
But thank you. Like, okay, I'm glad you like that. The sounds I picked. That's cool.
Well, then that affirmation is nice to hear from somebody.
It is.
Who,
especially when you're not asking for it.
Ken teaches music.
Yes.
He's deeply educated and talented.
And I love when someone who comes from that side of the music world looks at a rock pop guy like me who sort of wings it and says, hey, this was really good. Technically, it was really good, too.
Always nice to hear. All right, well, with that, let's bring this part 1 of our episode about inspiration to a close.
Yes.
Thanks, as always, for everything that you give to this dialogue.
Yes, this was fun.
Yeah, and we'll do part 2 for next week. And I am always grateful, as is Eric, for everyone who continues to listen to The Heart of the Cards and has joined our community recently. We've had a bunch of new subscribers, which is awesome. And we're still looking forward to seeing people in person. And it's great to have these conversations when we can't and pick up a thread of this conversation sometimes when we see people at conventions. That's always fun. And without you guys listening to us blather on and on about things, we wouldn't have the wonderful podcast that we do, which we have really been enjoying, and we hope you have too. Please like and subscribe if you get a chance. I'm obligated to say that. And we look forward to the next time we can have a conversation about creativity, inspiration, and dealing with what we're dealt.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of the Cards with Dan Green and Eric Stuart. We hope this conversation in some way spoke to you. Whatever your journey, we look forward to crossing paths again in the next episode. This is Veronica Taylor, and on behalf of Andromeda Productions, We wish you well.
Andromeda, always a sound choice.